This was Japan in 1945, a country ravaged by World War II. The cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki destroyed by the atomic bomb. Other cities, including Tokyo, damaged heavily by aerial bombardment. This is Japan now, less than 3 decades later, and the Japanese have made a comeback. Economic growth and development perhaps unprecedented in the history of any nation. The gross national product has increased from almost 11 billion in 1960s. Exports have skyrocketed, rising at an average annual rate of nearly 17% in the decade of the 60s, almost double the average growth rate of world trade. As a result of its growing dominance in world trade, Japan has built up a surplus in foreign exchange reserves, 18 billion in American dollars alone. So the Japanese government is encouraging industrialists to invest their surplus in facilities in the United States. With that in mind, the state of Alabama sent 20 businessmen to Japan to tell Japanese businessmen the Alabama story.
Several years ago, Alabama started in earnest toward a balanced economy of agriculture and industry. And in the last 10 or 12 years, a great number of new industries have sprung up in our state. And we've had the investment of much capital, not only from without Alabama, but also now from within the state. But we're also going a little further now in our industrial development. There are a group of 20 industrialists and businessmen today that are going to make a trip to Japan on May the 24th, beginning, in which they are going to talk about the investment of Japanese money and the bringing of Japanese industry to Alabama. As you know, the Japanese and other foreign countries have invested heavily in the United States and have built a great number of plants, employing, of course, the people who live in the area. And so I want to congratulate this group and say that I wish them a fine visit and a most successful visit. We have had much contact in the last year or so with people in other nations who are interested in locating industries in our own section of the country. And so I think this is a great forward step being made by this particular group and by the people of our own state. And we do appreciate the cooperation of the Alabama Development Office, which is a state function and a part of government run by the taxpayers of Alabama. This not only is a trip for the purpose of having economic benefits brought to the state of Alabama, but it also is involved in the broad national picture balance of payments, which our country happens to be behind on. And as you say, they have 18 billion of our dollars, and we want to get some of them back. And one of the ways to get them back is to help bring some of their industry that they are now locating throughout other parts of the world here to the United States and make that investment here and employ the people here. I wish you all the best of luck, and I appreciate the fact that all of you are making this trip for the state of Alabama and her people.
Shortly before Alabama's delegation left for the land of the rising sun, Governor George Wallace met with the Japanese ambassador to the United States, Nobuhiko Yoshiba, who was in Alabama for World Trade Day. Ambassador Yoshiba was pleased that an Alabama delegation was heading for his homeland.
Oh, now Alabama has become more and more popular in Japan, you know. But Japanese still have rather little knowledge about the south of the United States generally. And so I think it would be very timely, very good thing that the transmission is visiting us at this time.
The ambassador, along with the Japanese consulate in New Orleans and representatives of Japan's leading trading companies, participated in World Trade Day activities in the port city of Mobile. Several members of the Alabama Investment Mission delegation met with Ambassador Yoshiba in Mobile. Just 2 days later, those Alabamians were landing in Tokyo with 2 weeks of hard work ahead of them. The schedule for the delegation included dinner engagements with Japanese businessmen, visits with industrialists at their various plants, receiving guests in the Alabama Hospitality Suite, and participation in 2 Invest in the USA seminars. Those seminars were sponsored by the U.S. Department of Commerce, the National Association of State Development Agencies, and the Chambers of Commerce in Tokyo and Osaka. More than 400 Japanese businessmen attended the seminars. Americans explained to them the ease of investing in the United States, while other Japanese businessmen recounted their experiences in America. Outside the main seminar rooms, various states set up booths to pitch their own interest. Alabama has it all. That was the theme of the state booth, and Japanese businessmen paraded by the booth, picking up information about Alabama, its people, its resources, its tax system, and they carried away that information in plastic bags, which just happened to have a large rising sun emblazoned on them. Each day that the Alabamians were in Japan, they had visits to make to industrial facilities to talk with Japanese businessmen. Those visits included many names familiar to American consumers, such as Kawasaki and Panasonic. But there were also names that most Americans don't know now, but will be hearing from in the future. Names like Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Nippon, Ataka, Nomura, Koei, and Sumitomo, all industrial giants in the land of the rising sun. And the Alabamians admitted they were just a little nervous before their first visits.
Most of us was a little nervous as to what type reception we would receive, but this was soon eliminated because we were received with open arms. Of course, this is nature of the Japanese people, but I think after the first call, we knew that the people were interested in what we had to offer. They were full of questions, and they wanted answers to these questions. I think the reception has been great, far beyond what I personally expected.
One such visit was to Shionogi Pharmaceutical, where Alabamians were treated to a tour of the Shionogi plant, offices, and research labs. The Shionogi officials wanted to know about the state's labor supply, electric rates, and pollution control laws, among other things. And they especially wanted to show the Alabama delegation their water pollution control facility, which cleans water from a level of 500 parts per million down to less than 1 part per million. In all the visits, the Japanese seemed to be puzzled by the fact that most of the men in Alabama's delegation were private businessmen rather than representatives of the state government.
We had just assumed that all state delegations would have private businessmen in them, but we found that most had all state employees, where for Alabama we had 20 delegates over here and only 3 state employees. So what we tried to tell the people was that our interest was not from a personal point of view, but was to try to help our state develop as a whole. And if the state did develop as a result of our trip over here, or something we could contribute on this trip over here, then we would benefit from it as businessmen through the outcome of the economic development.
One of the next questions the Japanese asked Alabamians on plant visits was about labor, its availability, American unions, and training.
So one of the things we stressed most was the availability. We had to talk about unemployment rate, or the underemployed, the people who want to move up into better jobs, and the availability of the people there in Alabama. And then also we talked about the rates of pay, and then the training program offered by the state of Alabama. And this was very interesting to them because they want to know how they can get their facility equipped with personnel that have the ability to perform. And we assured them it could be done here in Alabama, and we also explained to them how the program was set up to train the personnel and have the personnel prepared when the plant was ready to open. So this was very interesting to them, because I think here in Japan they have the same situation where they train their people constantly and retrain them within their plants.
One of the greatest misconceptions that Americans have about the Japanese is that the country has an immense pool of low-cost labor and its industrial success is built on the exploitation of this labor at low wages. In fact, the average Japanese blue-collar worker earns almost as much as the average American worker.
They give a basic pay, say of $240 to $300 a month to their employee that's on the assembly line, such as we have maybe on the assembly lines of our garment manufacturing plants in Alabama. But these women, young girls mostly, that work in very close situations and takes manual dexterity with their fingers in assembling these small items, radios and so forth. But these personnel are highly trained, and they receive something equivalent to $240 to $300 a month, basic pay. But every 6 months, they receive a bonus that is equivalent to 3 months' pay. So really, if you add it up, they receive $240 to $300 a month, plus twice a year they receive another huge bonus. So that amounts in a year's time to 1/2 of the year's pay. So you see, and they also have a subsidized food program in the cafeteria. They have health and welfare benefits, and when you add it all up, I would estimate that it's fairly close to the pay that received in most of the plants in Alabama.
At both the Keio Plaza Hotel in Tokyo and the Royal Osaka Hotel in Osaka, the Alabama Suite was the center of activity for the state's delegation. The suite served as a site for team meetings to plot each day's activity. And the suite saw some of the most prominent Japanese businessmen pass through its doors. Those businessmen represented some of the country's biggest industries. Add to the list of dignitaries the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kazutoshi Hasegawa. Prominent bankers were also entertained in the Alabama Suite, since it was the Bank of Tokyo, the Fuji Bank, and the Sumitomo Bank that arranged many of the state meetings with Japanese businessmen. Bankers play an important role in Japanese industry. Some think that the banker's role is dominant.
The banker plays a very dominant role in the industry of this country. And of course, the banks here and bankers here were very interested in the participation of the bankers in the state of Alabama within the industry.
アラバマ州は多分アメリカの州のどの州よりも、産業のタックスフリーボンドというものに対するインセンティブを与え
This young lady is talking about Alabama. She was the translator as 3 members of the state delegation told the Alabama story to 5 major Japanese steel makers and 2 trading companies at the Japanese Steel Information Center. In Japan, the names of those steel and trading companies are as familiar as U.S. Steel is here. Names like Nippon Steel, Nippon Kokan, Sumitomo Metals, Kawasaki Steel, Kobe Steel, Mitsubishi, and Mitsui. The steel and trading men listened intently as the Alabamians talked about their state.
We're from all the major cities in the state. We have bankers, we have industrialists, we have people representing state government. However, our one interest is to get you to study Alabama, not just one particular area. Alabama has probably issued more industrial revenue, tax-free bonds than any state in the United States. And this allows a company to build a plant with bonds that the interest on is tax-free, therefore they sell at a much lower interest rate. Also, there are no taxes on any of the equipment or building in the bond issue.
A particular program offered by Alabama impressed the Japanese every time it was mentioned. That's the state's free training program, in which Alabama will train workers for a new industrial plant free of charge. It's a program very similar to those offered by other states, but with at least one major difference.
The major difference is that we do training on the job after the fundamentals are learned. My experience tells me you learn a job by doing the job. We pay the instructors on the job to make the worker successful.
The Japanese were also very interested in the possibility of exporting some of the product they might produce here back to their home country. In addition, they wanted to know about the cost of materials required for their production. The Alabama delegation was ready to answer those questions, first about exports with details of DISC.
This means domestic, international sales corporation. This would mean that if a Japanese producer was producing in the United States, he would qualify for this DISC plan. This means any of your exports would be on a very low tax basis. Those sales you made into the U.S. market would be taxed at the domestic rate, but exports at a very favorable tax rate.
As to the cost of materials, the Japanese were given the figures on everything they asked, and most of the time were impressed with the fact that materials in America cost less than in Japan. Of course, any state that talks business with Japan must have accessibility to the world through a modern transportation system. One of the key parts of Alabama's transportation system is its state dock system. Thus, it was only natural that the 7 Alabamians from the port city of Mobile were anxious to get a first-hand look at Japan's massive world ports in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe. In Kobe, the Alabamians saw one of the world's busiest ports, complete with ships everywhere you looked, a gigantic container terminal, and even a steel plant right at dockside. The willingness of the Japanese people to show the visiting Alabamians their ports, as well as their plants, their temples, and their parks, is a part of the Japanese personality, always courteous and hospitable. And Alabama had to show the Japanese what's known to other parts of the world as Southern hospitality. So many of the meetings with Japanese businessmen were conducted at restaurants over the finest in Oriental cuisine. Perhaps the finest example of a traditional Japanese meal served in prescribed fashion in a traditional Japanese atmosphere is the restaurant Hanya Inn. Here, in a room that's over 900 years old, members of the Alabama delegation met and talked with the publishers of the Japanese magazine President, which is similar to America's Fortune magazine. This combination of modern business and traditional customs is not unusual in Japan. In fact, it's a way of life. In this way of life, modern techniques coupled with the traditions, customs, and mores of ancient Japan may very well explain the dramatic resurgence of the Japanese since World War II. This is Yoshiharu Okamura. He's with the Taisei Corporation in Tokyo, and he served the Alabama delegation as interpreter, guide, and #1 friend during the entire 2 weeks in the land of the rising sun. Since he accompanied members of the state delegation on many of their visits with Japanese businessmen, he was well equipped to sum up the impression made by the Alabamians on their Japanese hosts.
I believe it is a very good question, and honestly, I feel this way, that as far as I can see, that the Japanese industries, some of the Japanese industry who are interested in investing in the States have been thinking of doing this for quite a few months already before you're making business here. But the important thing will be for them to decide whether they want to invest, how much money they have to invest, and then secondary, where. And the most important thing would be for them to decide when they will be deciding to invest this much.
Well, do you think that this will be a quick decision, or do you think it'll take a long time?
I believe it will depend strictly upon your approach to them, showing them how, say for instance, Alabama would be suitable for their investment, trying to help them out in the various directions. And if you know that that they are getting help from Alabama, they will be glad to settle in Alabama.
Well, now, you've heard Alabama's presentation and you've seen much of the material that they presented to the businessmen here. What things Alabama has to offer most impressed the Japanese businessmen?
I believe it was a type of training program that you will be able to offer, which will be supported by the state fund. And I noticed that some of the Japanese businessmen impressed tremendously. As I was sitting right next to the gentleman who were making the presentation to the company's representatives at the time of visit.
Now for a review of Alabama's reverse investment mission to Japan, here's Governor George C. Wallace.
In this film, we have tried to point out our recognition of the importance of attracting foreign-based manufacturers to Alabama. I am happy to report that Alabama's participation in the trip to Japan was most successful. Our delegation returned to Alabama with several projects that are actively considering our state as a possible location for their plants. The team had more than 100 appointments with Japanese industrialists and distributed more than 7,000 pieces of literature which describes Alabama's advantages as a place to live and work. The trip you have just seen is the first of several planned by the Alabama Development Office. In addition to Japan, they will be promoting Alabama in Canada, the Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe, and England. On behalf of the state, I want to thank these men for the great job they did on this venture. Alabama's future as a major international manufacturing state, in my judgment, is assured and will be assured through this type of coordinated effort.